One may regard the war as ever so necessary and desirable or not. Yet these effects will occur in any event. The logic of a government at war asserts itself more or less the same fashion, regardless of the war's provocation and purpose, because every major war requires the government to take a much bigger bite out of the people's resources quickly, and it cannot do so successfully without suppressing many normal liberties and rights, especially those that might be exercised to obstruct the government's wartime programs and policies, or to persuade people to resist the war or to demand its discontinuation or settlement. Hence, as Goring noted, the government vigorously denounces all those who stand in its way as traitors, or has its mouthpieces in the media do so, and it encourages the masses to act as amateur G-men, identifying disloyal citizens, hounding them into buckling under and reporting them to governmental authorities. Nowadays, for example, the government frequently encourages all of us to report any suspicious persons or actions to the police or the FBI, ostensibly to prevent terrorism. Needless to say, no free society can exist when everyone, in effect, has enlisted as a government informant, especially when the character of the threatening person or actions is so vague that it is bound to give rise to abuses. Not uncommonly now, people are reported for nothing more than looking like an Arab or for speaking a strange language to strange-looking companions. It happens all the time. This insidious enlistment of informants, so reminiscent of the atrocious American Protective League during World War I, is turning our once free society into a sort of East Germany redux. Horror stories abound of perfectly innocent persons taken into custody for interrogation or worse. While the government promotes mindless support of its war-making and may induce a sort of patriotic hysteria in the most mentally fragile personalities, many citizens swing into action as faux patriots on strictly opportunistic grounds. War contractors, for example, may be able to position themselves to make a killing, so to speak, off of the actual killing. Moreover, they may parlay their wartime business as government suppliers into profitable post-war business that long outlives the war itself. The aircraft companies, none of which amounted to anything before World War II, that suddenly profited so greatly during the war became permanent, highly successful feeders at the government's trough, where some of them are feasting lavishly even now, the current administration's military buildup having proved a godsend for them and a boon to their stockholders. Other people simply want a cushy job in the government's expanded wartime bureaucracy. The so-called war on terror has given rise to a huge industry that has emerged almost from scratch during the past few years. Thus, besides the military-industrial congressional complex, we now have a parallel security-industrial congressional complex. Between 1999 and 2006, the number of federal Homeland Security contractors increased from 9 companies to 33,890. Let me repeat that. Between 1999 and 2006, the number of federal Homeland Security contractors increased from 9 companies to 33,890. And a multi-billion-dollar industry selling security-related goods and services has emerged, complete with specialized newsletters, magazines, websites, consultants, trade shows, job placement services, and a veritable army of lobbyists working around the clock to widen the river of money that flows to these opportunists. As Paul Harris wrote, quote, "America is in the grip of a business based on fear," end quote. The last thing these people want, of course, is an abatement of the perceived terrorist threat. And we can count on them to hype any signs of an increase in such threats and of course, to crowd the trough, happily slurping up the taxpayers' money. What chance does peace have when millions of well-heeled, politically connected opportunists of all stripes depend on the continuation of a state of war for their personal financial success? For members of Congress, the Department of Homeland Security has quickly become the most magnificent dispenser of pork and patronage to come along in decades. Everyone is happy here, except for the beleaguered ordinary citizens whose pockets are being picked and whose liberties are being overridden by politicians and private sector opportunists with utter contempt for the people's intelligence and rights. So long as the people continue to be consumed by fear and to fall for the age-old swindle that the government seeks only to protect them, these abuses will never end. Recall Margaret Atwood's poem, Siren Song, with which I prefaced my remarks. It begins, "This is the one song everyone would like to learn, the song that is irresistible, the song that forces men to leap overboard in squadrons, even though they see the beached skulls." And it ends, alas, it is a boring song, but it works every time. It works every time because people falsely believe that those who sing it are their protectors rather than their exploiters. Until people learn to disregard the state's siren song of benevolence and protection, they will continue to suffer and die as victims of the state's wars, foreign and domestic. People yearn for security, and they look to the state to provide it. But they are calling upon a wolf to guard the sheep. The state cannot refrain from crime because it is an inherently criminal enterprise, living by robbery, which it relabels taxation, and maintaining its turf by murder, which it relabels war. Constantly singing the siren song, it seduces the people by giving back to them a portion of what it has previously extorted from them, and by ceaselessly claiming to protect them from all manner of threats to their lives, liberties, property, and even their self-esteem. If it protects them at all, however, it does so only as a shepherd protects his captive flock, not because he recognizes and respects the natural rights of his sheep, but only to keep them unmolested in his sole possession and control until he finds it expedient to shear or slaughter them. A peaceful state is an impossibility. Even a state that refrains from fighting foreigners goes on fighting its own subjects continuously, to keep them under its control and to suppress competitors who might try to break into the domain of its protection racket. The people cry out for security, yet they will not take responsibility for their own protection. And like the mariners of Greek mythology, they leap overboard immediately in response to the state's siren song. When the Israelites had fled from their captivity in Egypt, they made do for centuries with only judges. Yet they were not satisfied, and eventually they demanded a king, crying out, "We will have a king over us."